situated here. Let me start with some opening remarks. Over the last week, the Sudanese Rapid Support Forces has carried out a major and brutal attack across eastern part of the Al Jazeera state in Sudan, located just to the south of Khartoum. They attacked multiple villages in the area, deliberately targeting civilians. Many of the RSF's victims have been children and women. The United States condemns these attacks in the strongest terms and calls on the RSF to halt violence against civilians immediately. The group's leaders have repeatedly committed to their obligation to civilian protection under international humanitarian law, and they must uphold those commitments. The United States recently imposed sanctions on Algoni Hamdan Daglo Musa for his role in RSF atrocities, and we will continue to impose costs on all those committing and fueling these atrocities. These heinous attacks are sadly only the latest in a war that has gone on for far too long. Attacks like these exacerbate the severe hunger and displacement crisis that has put more than 25 million Sudanese in need of emergency humanitarian relief and forced more than 14 million people to flee their homes since the conflict began. Our support for the Sudanese people is steadfast as they demand a sustainable end to the conflict and work to develop a process to resume the stalled political transition to inclusive, civilian-led democratic governance. That, Matt.
Great. Well, not great, but I mean, not great at all.
Understood, yeah.
Sorry.
Understood.
Just before we get into the Middle East, I just wanted to ask you if you got an answer to my question about the Cuba vote, UN.
I know there's going to be a vote today. I don't believe it's happened yet. It's occurring this afternoon.
Yes.
So, what was your question? How we will vote? We will vote no, but
you will vote no.
We will vote
have
no.
you lined up anyone?
As I said, as I previewed yesterday, it was likely. I didn't think we were going to vote for a resolution condemning ourselves, and in fact, we will vote no.
Have you lined up anyone to vote with you?
I think I'll wait until we see the vote result to talk about the outcome.
So no, you're not sure if you'll get one or two others?
I would not expect an outcome.
Dissimilar?
Dissimilar. I was going to say inconsistent. Dissimilar is a better word than to previous outcomes.
In other words,
this is a resolution.
Another demonstration of virtually the entire world's opposition to this embargo.
I wouldn't expect a dissimilar result, but we have made our position clear on it for some time, and we'll continue in our vote at the UN today.
All right. To the Middle East. Yesterday at the briefing, shortly before the Knesset voted on these two bills, that deal with UNRWA use, once again reiterated the U.S. position that they shouldn't do it, and that the law shouldn't be passed, and that if they were, there should be steps taken to mitigate the situation. So now that the laws have both passed, and recognizing that they won't take effect for another 2 months or so, at least, what is your response, and what are you planning to do, particularly given the emphasis that you guys, Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin in particular, have put on improving the aid supply into Gaza?
Yeah. Let me start by just reiterating that we are deeply troubled by this legislation. It could shutter UNRWA operations in the West Bank, in Gaza, in East Jerusalem. It poses risks for millions of Palestinians who rely on UNRWA for essential services, including health care and primary and secondary education. UNRWA, of course, plays a critical role in providing services to Palestinians in Gaza, the West Bank, and throughout the wider region, and particularly in Gaza. They play a role right now that at least today cannot be filled by anyone else. They are a key partner in delivering food, water, and other humanitarian assistance to civilians in Gaza that wouldn't have anyone else to get it from if UNRWA were to go away. So we have made clear our concerns over this bill. We have made clear our opposition to this bill. As the Secretary said in his letter, and as I reiterated yesterday, there could be consequences under U.S. law and U.S. policy for the implementation of this legislation. We are going to engage with the government of Israel in the days ahead about how they plan to implement it. We're going to watch and see if there are legal challenges to the law and if there's any impact by those legal challenges. And then we'll make our decisions after looking at all of those factors.
All right, I'll let others go.
Can I follow up on the
Sean.
aspect?
Let me I can't let you go without commenting. That's a fantastic shirt.
thanks.
Before we get going, it's great.
Which I bought from Angola, so anybody on this trip.
I figured you got that on the trip that we were on, so it's great.
Well, Africa's a fashion powerhouse. Seriously, could I ask you about back on UNRWA? The Norwegian government today said that it's going to go to the International Court of Justice, see if Israel has actually legal obligations to let in aid, and specifically the context of UNRWA. Does the U.S. have any comment on that move by the Norwegians and the ICJ?
I don't have any comment on that move, but they certainly have a legal obligation to allow humanitarian assistance in and not to erect roadblocks to humanitarian assistance to people in Gaza. And we've made that clear since the outset of this conflict. And a great number of our engagements with the government of Israel have been around ensuring that they do let humanitarian assistance in and that they do ensure that humanitarian assistance gets to the people that need it. And that is precisely one of our major concerns about this legislation. I should be clear, by the way, it's not our only concern about this legislation. We also support the work that UNRWA does outside of Gaza. We support the work they do in the West Bank. We support the work that they do in the broader region to deliver humanitarian services to Palestinians. But the work is absolutely critical and irreplaceable in Gaza right now. And we made clear before the passage of this legislation, and it remains true, that there are potential policy and legal implications to this legislation being implemented, and we're going to be in conversation with the government of Israel about that.
Sure. Maybe just stepping away from the UNRWA issue per se. I wonder if you have anything to say about the Israeli strike today in Gaza. I think the latest death toll that we've reported is nearly 100 by eyewitness accounts. Many, if not most, appear to be civilians, children. I know you don't speak for the government of Israel, but as Israel's, do you have anything to say about this?
We are deeply concerned by the loss of civilian life in this incident. This was a horrifying incident with a horrifying result. I can't speak to the total death toll, but there are reports of 24 children killed in this incident. No doubt, a number of them are children who have been fleeing the effects of this war for more than a year now. We have reached out to the government of Israel to ask what happened here. We don't yet know the underlying circumstances. We have not gotten a full explanation from them about what happened. But you step back and look at where we are in this campaign. We are a year into the government of Israel's military campaign in Gaza. And Israel has decimated Hamas's military capabilities. It has decimated Hamas's leadership. It has, through its military action, ensured that Hamas does not have the ability to repeat the attacks of October 7th. And all of that, getting to here, came at great cost to civilians in Gaza, which is, of course, often the case when civilians are caught in the crossfire in conflict. And so that tragic cost to civilians continues today, quite notably in this strike, which seems to have claimed significant civilian life. And it is another reminder of why we need to see an end to this war.
And so why would you see, I mean, the Secretary himself also said last week that he thinks that Israel's strategic goals have largely been met. I mean, so why carry out strikes like this, and what's the utility at this point?
So you have to take that question to the government of Israel. So I will say that as the Secretary said, yes, their strategic goals have largely been met. Now, there is a strategic goal that remains incredibly important, and that is to return all of the hostages. But as you have heard any number of leaders in our government speak to for some time, from the President to Secretary Blinken to Secretary of Defense Austin, it is critically important, not just to the people of Gaza, but to Israelis and to Israel's own security, that Israel be mindful of achieving larger security, that Israel be mindful of achieving a larger strategic success, and that they be mindful of finding a way to end this campaign in a way that brings the hostages home and in a way that ensures their security, and not just continuing in an endless, perpetual conflict.
Just one more, and this has obviously been something you've been asked many times
Yeah.
over the past year. But what is the U.S. going to do about it? I mean, the U.S. is obviously the major arms supplier to Israel, the major diplomatic supporter of Israel. You said that this incident is horrifying, and while you're trying to address and try to find out more information, what would be the consequences, if any, if the U.S. feels that this was without warrant? It's hard to say it's justified in any case, but if the U.S. decides that this was what it was.
Look, so not to get ahead of things, but when it comes to assessing any one individual strike, it's something that we have to be very deliberate about and take time to assess the underlying circumstances to decide whether there was any particular potential legal violation and what the implications of that would be. I will say what we are going to do about it, though, is to continue to try and end the war and continue to impress upon to the government of Israel the need to end this war, to continue to work with the other mediators, Egypt and Qatar, to try and find a way forward to end this war, and to continue to work with partners throughout the region and throughout the world to present a plan for what follows the war, which would give Israel the confidence that they don't need to continue an endless fight, that there would be actual security in Gaza that would provide security for Israel too, and so that they can withdraw their forces from Israel and know that there isn't an ongoing threat to Israeli civilians and to the state of Israel. Sorry, Shannon, go ahead. I'll come to you next. I'm just going to go down the line, although then I have to skip Jillian. So I've skipped Jillian, sorry. Having promised Shannon Humair, I'll do Shannon Humair and then Jillian.
Going back to the letter sent by Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin to the Israeli government, it calls for the creation of a virtual channel to discuss civilian harm incidents and says the first virtual meeting of that channel should take place before the end of October. Has it happened yet, or is it on the books?
We have had conversations about the establishment of that channel. I don't have anything definitive yet to report. We continue to have conversations about how to establish that in a way that will be meaningful and will actually produce results.
Does the State Department consider that meeting or its equivalent to have taken place already?
I don't have an announcement to make today. We have a few days left in the month. Yeah.
Matt, so on that letter, I think that was sent about more than 2 weeks ago. Does the United States have some sort of an interim assessment on how Israel has done so far in terms of fulfilling U.S. requirements, given what's going on in northern Gaza too?
We have been watching and engaging with them about each of the steps that we called on them to implement in that letter. Now, I'm not, during this 30-day period, going to go through line by line and say which one has been implemented and which one has not, although we are very carefully tracking that, and we are engaging with them about specific steps that we want to see them take. But I don't think it's appropriate for me, while we're going through this process, to go through one by one and talk about where they are. Just speaking largely, though, or speaking broadly, I should say, we have seen some progress, but we haven't seen enough. So I said last week, what the Secretary said last week, it continues to be the case that we have seen them take some initial steps, but we need to see them do much more, and we are engaged with them to impress upon them the importance of doing much, much more.
Right. Given it's another 2 weeks left, I believe, how confident that are you that they are actually going to fulfill these?
I don't think it's appropriate for me to make any predictions at this point. We made clear what the steps are we want to see implemented. We put a deadline on it. Let's wait until we get to the deadline to talk about where things stand.
Right, and about this deadline, there is a lot of commentary out there, and in the law, there is no grace period. You are saying at this moment in time that you have not seen enough from Israel. So I just want to ask the question that a lot of people out there are asking: why not implement the law now?
We are implementing the law. We have not assessed them to be in violation of the law at this point.
But you're just saying they're not fulfilling the things that you want from them. They
correct.
are impeding aid into Gaza.
That is not what I said.
They're not impeding.
That is not what I said. We have outlined a number of steps that we want to see them take in the letter.
Right.
Now, to answer your question, the reason why we didn't set an immediate deadline, or you have to implement all these steps 5 minutes after you get the letter, or you have to implement all these steps 7 days after the letter, is because there are some of the steps that we understand take actual time to implement. If you look at some of the, but we thought that 30 days was an appropriate measure, not 2 weeks, or we'd put 2 weeks in the letter. There were some things that we wanted to see happen immediately, and we saw some of those happen immediately. We saw Erez reopen immediately. We saw the Jordan route reopen immediately. And the letter made clear some things we want to see happen immediately, and then we need to see other things happen within 30 days. We're not yet at 30 days. I promise you we will have an extensive conversation about this at the end of that 30-day period, but we're in that window now.
Okay. But I'm just having trouble understanding how the two things add up, and that is the secretary has said, you've said, whatever Israel was doing to ensure more aid goes into Gaza, that has fallen off significantly. There hasn't been a sustained effort, and they have not been doing enough for a sustained period of time. How does that not mean that they're not impeding aid? Like, how can those two things be true at the same
because
time?
we have not judged them to have.
So despite the fact that they're not doing enough,
we had
they haven't
not.
been impeding
So we thought it was appropriate that when we saw the decrease. Look, there are a lot of reasons that aid cannot make it in. Some of them can be intentional. Some of them can be unintentional. Some of them can be bureaucratic, either inside Israel system or inside the UN system. Some can be the effect of criminal looters, who obviously the government of Israel does not control and is not responsible for. And so, given all of those different factors that can go into the result that we saw, and the result that we saw was aid coming down more than 50% from its peak, we made clear that, look, on the things that you can control, on the things that the government of Israel can control, recognizing that you don't control everything, we want to see steps. And at the end of those steps, we will come back and talk about what the results have been.
Just one final thing on northern Gaza. When you were answering, I think, Shannon, you talked about this endless cycle that the Israeli military seems to be in right now. So is the U.S. calling the Israeli military to wrap up, to finish what it's doing in northern Gaza now?
We want to find a durable end to the war. And I say the durable end to the war is important, an important way to think about it. We've not called on Israel to just withdraw from Gaza and leave a vacuum there, because a vacuum actually doesn't help the Palestinian people, who would be once again living pretty immediately under Hamas's tyranny and would be potentially subject to the same jeopardy that Hamas has put them in for the past year by launching terrorist attacks against Israel. And it certainly wouldn't solve Israel's security problem. It would potentially land us back in the same place months or a few years down the road. And so that's why we are working to restart talks, which happened over the weekend, to try to find a durable end to the war. It's why we're working on the plans for what follows the war with our partners.
Oh, actually, just really the final one. On this special channel or mechanism to talk about civilian harm incidents, you said you're still talking. Can you explain why it hasn't been set up?
I don't have any more to read out today. It's an ongoing discussion between us and the government of Israel, and I just don't have anything.
So when you say that you raised this particular incident of today with the children killed,
yes,
you raised it with the U.S.
The United States raised it directly with the government.
It was
of
the
Israel.
ambassador.
I'm not going to get into who, but
Okay.
it was conversations
Thanks.
from our government to theirs. Now, sorry to have.
Can I ask a quick off-topic question
Yeah.
on China, foreign influence operations? We've talked about Russia and Iran kind of ramping up foreign influence operations ahead of the election. Friday, Saturday, there was new reporting that the Chinese government-linked officials managed to hack the audio of a senior Trump campaign advisor's cell phone. That was preceded by general reporting that they were trying to get access to data for the former president and Senator Vance and unnamed folks on the Kamala Harris campaign. Is this something that you are tracking with regards to China especially, and are you addressing it diplomatically at all, or are you just leaving it all up to the FBI to investigate?
So I'm not going to speak to the specific incident because it is appropriate for the FBI and the intelligence community to speak to any specific incidents when it comes to such influence operations or such potential espionage operations across any wide variety of incidents. I will say that we have raised consistently with the government of China at the secretary's level and at other levels the fact that we are watching very closely any attempts to hack U.S. systems, U.S. equipment, U.S. personnel, to interfere in U.S. elections or other U.S. Entities or events, and that we would certainly hold them accountable for any such actions.
Beyond just the hacking portion of it, is it fair to say that you've seen an increase in Chinese influence operations here generally?
Yeah, I would defer to the intelligence community to speak to that. As you know, the State Department has the mandate from Congress to track influence operations conducted by foreign governments overseas, but when it comes to influence operations that foreign governments conduct inside the United States, it's a matter for the intelligence community and the FBI, and so I would defer to them.
And I'd have to go back and look at previous transcripts. I don't remember off the top of my head, but at one point you had said, or kind of indicated that.
Now you're hoping I can remember what I said.
No, I don't think you have to. Basically, I just want to know if at one point you had indicated that Chinese influence efforts targeting U.S. officials, not even related to the election, just in general, were sort of, I don't know if they were more sophisticated, but they surpassed the efforts of the other countries. Would you still describe, like they were more aggressive, would you still describe that as the status quo?
I don't remember that comment, although I'm not disputing it. I just don't remember that at all. But I do again think it'd be more appropriate for me to defer to the intelligence communities and to law enforcement to speak to that.
Okay. So it's not. Is it fair? It's fair to say you don't really address that.
It's just not. Yeah, it's not that on the look. So when it comes to making assessments about what's happening inside the United States and monitoring what's happening inside the United States, the intelligence community and law enforcement does that work. Now, when there is something that rises to a level of concern that needs to be addressed directly with the Chinese government, we do address it directly with the Chinese government. And we have, over many number of months, made clear directly to Chinese officials our concerns about this type of behavior and the potential for this type of behavior and the fact that we would take it very seriously. Yeah.
Thanks, Matt. Just back to Israel and Palestinian territories. There's another deadline coming up for Israel's finance minister to sign off on whether the Palestinian Israeli banks can engage in correspondence. There's concern from the US and also the G7 members, and apparently a letter was sent to Netanyahu expressing concern that Smotrich won't sign off on extending that cooperation and that it could potentially collapse the Palestinian economy. How real is this concern from the US, and can you give us guidance on what the US would do if he decided not to go ahead and extend that?
We have been extremely concerned about this. You will recall, of course, that this is not the first time we faced this possibility. Several months ago, that particular minister made threats that he would not extend this particular provision, and we made clear to the government of Israel that that such an action would have severe consequences for the Palestinian economy. It would have severe consequences for Israel's security. It would potentially cause enormous disruption in the West Bank. And that's not in the Palestinians' interest, and it's not in Israel's interest. And we were able to impress upon the government of Israel the incredibly harmful nature of such an action the last time they got up to such a deadline, and convince them to extend it. And we're continuing to impress upon them the same thing this time. I don't want to deal with a hypothetical about what would happen if they didn't extend this provision. It's important that they do. Yeah, Saeed.
Thank you, Matt. Going back to UNRWA, I mean, I went to UNRWA schools for a while. My wife went to UNRWA schools all her life, and she depended on UNRWA ration. It is a major part of sustaining the Palestinians in every way. And, trying to, sort of satanize and UNRWA and say that it had done some evil things and so on, goes back before this war. It goes back to 2017 when they stopped the fund. My question to you, you said that, you are deeply troubled by the decision. And you also said that you engage the Israelis. What steps will the United States take to ensure that UNRWA continues to operate.
I'm not going to preview anything from here today, Saeed. If you look at the letter that the Secretary sent, he made clear that we're opposed to the passage of this legislation, and he made clear that there could be legal and policy implications to the implementation of that legislation. That remains true.
Okay, but you see, because you said that we want to see that aid is properly allowed into the Palestinian areas and so on. But we're not talking about UNRWA. UNRWA is basically, if UNRWA is compromised, the whole aid for the Palestinians, and in fact, their whole connection with what's going on in the world community, it stops. It's totally compromised. I'm saying that will you, let's say, agree to if UNHCR, for instance, takes over the aid to the Palestinians?
Saeed, I can't get into a hypothetical about what would
Let
happen.
me ask you a couple more questions, if you allow me. Now, you said that at one point, I think you said that if there's a vacuum, then Hamas would return and the Palestinians will be under the tyranny of Hamas again. So is the purpose of the war is really to free the Palestinians from Hamas tyranny?
The purpose of the war, from Israel's perspective, and I'm just going to say what they have said publicly, that the purpose of the war was to ensure that to ensure that Hamas could not repeat this attack again, to hold its leadership accountable. They have done both of those things, and to return the hostages. They have completed two pretty significant objectives. They've also decimated the Hamas's military capabilities, and so what the Secretary impressed upon them last week was that it is time to find a way to bring this war to an end. Now, we have also made clear, and this is, we have also made clear that Hamas cannot continue to govern Gaza the way it did before October 7th, because you saw the result of Hamas governance of Gaza, and that is horrific consequences for the Israeli people and horrific consequences for the Palestinian people.
But seeing what, I don't know, I mean, they call it a war. It's not a war. There is no opposing army. It is really a slaughter that we have every day. And I don't want to enter into polemics.
Saeed, is the stipulation that there are no Hamas fighters left who are still shooting at the IDF soldiers?
Yes, of course there are Hamas fighters.
Well, so okay, so that's before you rename the conflict or let's just establish facts about what is actually happening.
Honestly, what we see day after day is a slaughter. It is a slaughter. I think there will come a time when you guys have to call it exactly what it is, because every day, I asked this question several weeks back about Palestinians get up every day, for another 100 dead, for another 100, and this keeps going on. There is no end in sight. It doesn't seem that Israel has any incentive to basically indulge even in serious talks about a ceasefire.
Saeed, the horrific consequences of this war are exactly why we are trying to end it. The very things you just went through, and I would add to the suffering that's going on, the suffering of the hostages and the hostages' families, is for all those reasons that we're trying to end the war, and trying to end the war in a way that ensures peace and security for Israelis and Palestinians in the future.
Okay, one last question on the aid. Now, the letter was sent out, I guess, around October 15th, so the deadline is November 15th?
I think it was sent
November 13th.
It was sent October 14th. It was 30 days.
14th.
There's
Sorry,
31 days in
day.
October, so that might be November 13th. I don't know when you start the count, but there will be a lawyer somewhere in our building who could tell you the answer, the precise answer to that question.
So on November 15th, we're going to say the deadline has passed and you have not done. I'm not going
to predict what we're going to do, but we made clear in the letter what the deadline was for implementing changes.
Maybe you could bring that lawyer down to answer some questions from the podium, particularly about how you guys have not been able to come to any conclusion about whether what Israel is doing amounts to violations of international law.
Well, there are any number of lawyers in this building who are working on that question, but
I know.
For better or for worse, it's my job to stand before you all and take questions every day.
Sorry, when you say there are a number of lawyers in this building who are working on that question, the State Department lawyers are working on the question of whether or not Israeli military has violated international humanitarian law in Gaza or not? There are State Department lawyers working on that?
Of course there are. That's something we've said a number of times, that there are a number of
Within what process exactly?
I'm not going to get, so Humera, you know the answer to this question because
hold
on, just let me finish before. You know the answer to this question because you asked it to me before, and I've answered it before. We have a number of ongoing processes to look at the facts of a number of incidents and to make specific assessments
Yes, but
about
I'm
those
pretty
incidents.
sure you didn't mention State Department lawyers
Of
are
cour-
looking at it.
of course
like
they're
you said,
state-
we
they're
have
state-
ongoing
so-
processes. So the L Bureau is involved.
So of course
in-
there are lawyers Humera, first let me just back up and say, there is very little that we do here that doesn't involve lawyers in one way or the other. But of course, when it comes to making
Sure,
judgments
sure.
about international humanitarian law, of course there are lawyers involved. They're not the only people involved, but yeah, of course they are.
And is this part of an atrocity determination
I'm not going to
process?
get. I'm not going to get into the processes that we have.
Can you
underway.
say you don't have an atrocity
No, I'm
determination
not.
process?
As I have said to you before, I don't think it's appropriate for me to talk about the underlying processes that we have underway while they're ongoing. Tom. Can I go to Michelle and then come back to Tom? Because I've seen you come in and out a few times. I have a feeling you need to file. So.
Sorry if I missed
Yeah.
this, but the Knesset passed a bill today to bar the U.S. from reopening the consulate for Palestinians. And I wonder what you make of that.
So I was not aware of the passage of that bill. I apologize. I'll have to take that back and get an answer. So apologize. Tom, go ahead.
Maybe you could ask that same lawyer. And he's taking it
I'm not sure. That's a
from you.
policy question, not a legal one. So
Well, I don't know. It seems like a legal question. I'm not sure that the Israeli parliament can decide whether or not you guys are going to
Well,
open it.
maybe that will be a legal question. I'll have to. Yeah. Tom, go ahead.
I wanted to follow up on Saeed's very first point there about UNRWA, because we understand the immediate critique that you have of the attempts to shutter it, about the critical urgency of aid into Gaza and the effects on the West Bank and so on. But there is a deeper motivation for a lot of Israeli politicians, especially nationalists, who want to break the link, the historical link between Palestinian registered refugees of today and their historical dispossession in 1947, 1948, because that breaks the link between when 750,000 Palestinians fled or were forced from their homes in what is now Israel in 48, and the conflict today. So that's really important. And I just want to get a sense from you, because I don't know if we've heard an answer to this question. Do you support those Palestinians continuing to have registered refugee status?
So I can't speak to that today. I can tell you what we're focused on when it comes to UNRWA's work are the critical services that they provide. And they provide those services, as I said, in Gaza, in the West Bank, across the region, and it's critical that work to continue. Now, as to the broader question, I can take that back and get you an answer.
Okay, I mean, it's just important because you said...
Not here. I'll take you back and get an answer.
Okay, fine. On your own letter of the 13th of October, you warned in there, about the effects of legislation to ban UNRWA, and you said to Gallant and Derma, we ask that you take all possible steps, whether with lawmakers or using the authorities of the Prime Minister's office, to ensure this doesn't come to pass. I mean, that part, it seems they've already clearly ignored because the vote has passed. So they've had 2 weeks to work with lawmakers to stop it. They're not listening to you?
The bill has passed, so.
But you asked them to work with lawmakers to ensure this doesn't come to pass. So that part you've already lost on.
So as I said before, the bill's passed, and we made quite clear our concerns, and we will make our decisions based on the next steps, based on the implementation of this law, and based on any potential legal challenges. As I said, there's always, when you have controversial laws that like this that pass, the potential for challenges that delay their implementation. I don't know if that will happen, but we're going to watch over the next few days to see.
But I asked the question because does it give you any sense of how closely or how seriously they take your letter? Because I've already ignored that part.
Well, we're going to see, right? Look, I'll tell you, we've heard the Secretary speak to this. We've seen them already take a number of steps that we called for, and others they haven't taken yet. So we're going to we're going to look at the end of the 30 days and go through and see what they've implemented, what they haven't.
So just let me go on this point, because that's your letter. In the March 28th ICJ order on the South Africa genocide case, in order 51-2A, I think it is, they say that Israel must take all necessary and effective measures to ensure, without delay, in full cooperation with the United Nations, the unhindered provision, to allow aid to get into Gaza. I mean, in full cooperation with the United Nations, or the country in question to then ban the primary UN agency that is responsible for that, does not seem like full cooperation.
So I will admit that do not remember. I read that order when it came down. I do not have it in front of me and do not have the provision that you're looking at to study. But we have made clear. I will say we've made clear, kind of in keeping with that order, precisely how important it is that UNRWA be allowed to continue. And even if you step back from UNRWA, how important it is that Israel cooperate with all of the UN agencies that are operating on the ground inside Gaza to deliver food, water, medicine, and other humanitarian assistance, and it continues to be critical that they take those steps.
But do you, I mean, you talked about its importance, but this is a key organ of international humanitarian law that has made this order this year in the midst of this crisis. I mean, do you back that call by the ICJ?
We absolutely want to see humanitarian assistance get in. We want to see it get in through the other UN partners, and we want to see it get in through UNRWA.
And just finally, on this airstrike in Bet Lahia you referenced, you talked about, the war's gone on for a year. Getting here came at great cost to civilians in Gaza, often the case when civilians are caught in the crossfire of conflict. And I know you've used that phrase many times before. Is that a specific reference to this airstrike? Do you see this as crossfire?
No, as I also said, as you notice, if you would note, my full quote said, "We don't know what happened in this strike. We don't know the particular circumstances." So no, it was about the broader conflict. When it comes to this particular strike, we have reached out to the government of Israel for information, made clear we want to know exactly what happened, how you could have a result that produces, according to reports, dozens of children dead, and we don't yet know the answer to that question.
I just raise it because it is an expression you've used and the Secretary's used many times about crossfire, including, when there have been many civilian casualties in airstrikes. I mean, the Palestinians do not have air defenses, so I'm just sort of puzzled about this use of the phrase crossfire.
So I think it should be pretty clear. First of all, when I made clear it was about the broader
Absolutely,
conflict.
And
in the broader conflict, you do have Hamas leadership, Hamas battalions who locate themselves under civilian buildings and fire at Israeli forces from civilian buildings. Now, just to say, there are something, and that's crossfire, right? You have times when there are airstrikes that Israel carries out because they know that Hamas is located there. There are times they carry out airstrikes because they have IDF soldiers on the ground who are coming under fire from a particular location, and this is a standard military practice, obviously, and they call in an airstrike to take out that location because they have soldiers who are under fire from there. That's the definition of crossfire, I think.
Isn't it a bit disingenuous, though, because crossfire would be understood to mean if civilians are caught in crossfire, you would understand that usually to be an accident on the ground because people are literally caught in crossfire. But using it to describe airstrikes when many, many civilians are killed feels misleading.
I think crossfire means civilians caught between one military striking a terrorist organization or another military, or a terrorist organization striking a military, and that is what is happening in these incidents. Yeah, Abby.
You said earlier, and this is a hypothetical, but I'm starting with your own hypothetical, if this UNRWA legislation was implemented.
A hypothetical on a hypothetical.
Well, following on yours, if this UNRWA legislation is implemented, just digging down on that, you've described them as irreplaceable, that there's no alternative. So at that point, would you assess that Israel is directly or indirectly impeding the delivery of humanitarian aid?
I really can't predict what kind of an assessment we will make in the future. I made clear our concerns over it, and I made clear we're going to watch over the coming days what happens with the implementation of this law, but where we will land, I'm not going to forecast today.
And then there are some reports from earlier this week that the IDF detained medical staff within one of the largest hospitals in northern Gaza. The UN said yesterday that they left 2 doctors to take care of hundreds of patients. Is the U.S. Asking Israel about what led them to detain those medical staff, and are you satisfied with their answer?
We are asking. I don't have an answer yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you concerned about?
Certainly, we would be concerned about the reports of doctors being detained if it prevented doctors from, if there was no reasonable basis for that detention and it was preventing them from carrying out critical life-saving work. Absolutely, we would be concerned about that. But as always, we want to establish the actual facts, and we're looking into it and asking the government of Israel for more information. Janie.
Thank you, Matt. A couple of questions on Russia and North Korea, and I will follow up if I may. North Korea's foreign minister went to Russia to discuss additional dispatch of North Korean troops. And Russian foreign minister Sergei Lavrov claimed that the dispatch of North Korean troops was legally justified under the Russia and North Korea mutual military treaty. Do you think that the dispatch of North Korean choose to help Russia's illegal war is a violation of international law?
We do. We believe that Russia's training of DPRK soldiers involving arms or related material is a direct violation of Security Council Resolutions 1718, 1874, and 2270. And DPRK soldiers providing or receiving any training or other assistance related to the use of ballistic missiles or other arms would violate Resolutions 1718, 1874, and 2070, in addition to Russia and the DPRK's ongoing UN arms embargo violations.
And one more, the UN Security Council meeting on the North Korea's military deployment will be held tomorrow. As you know, sanctions in the Security Council will be difficult due to opposition from China and Russia. Recently, the United States and South Korea and Japan and their allies have established a multilateral sanctions system against North Korea. Can sanctions on military cooperation between Russia and North Korea be implemented through this system?
So the multilateral sanctions monitoring team is a mechanism for examination, analysis, and public reporting on the implementation of UN sanctions measures against the DPRK. It's not a sanctions imposing mechanism itself, but of course we do maintain the ability to impose sanctions on both Russia and North Korea. We've shown we're willing to use those abilities and authorities in the past, and we will continue to do so when appropriate.
Does the United States delegation to visit Ukraine, because South Korea already visited NATO and Ukraine?
So we have,
do you have any?
We have U.S. delegations who are traveling to Ukraine virtually every week. I don't have one to announce today, but it's quite regular for to see U.S. officials visiting Ukraine. The Secretary of Defense was there last week. Secretary Blinken was there last month, and we will have a number of important visits coming in the coming days. The Chief of Staff to Ukraine's president is here today, meeting with Secretary Blinken and others from the United States, from the U.S. government.
Thank you.
So there are multiple reports saying that the new appointed head of Hezbollah is in Iran. Given that Israelis started as soon as the announcement came officially about his appointment that they're going to take him out, is U.S. concerned that Israeli taking him out in Iran will intensify the situation in the region, especially with the Iranians saying that they are preparing for attack on Israel?
I don't want to comment on a hypothetical action in any way.
Okay, and I have another one regarding comments by Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield today. She said that the United States made clear to Prime Minister Netanyahu that 1 year into the conflict, Israel must address catastrophic humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The United States rejects any Israeli efforts to starve Palestinians in Jabalia or elsewhere, and that Israel's word must be matched by action on the ground. Right now, that is not happening. This must change immediately. So can we take this to mean that the U.S. is acknowledging that there are Israeli efforts to starve Palestinians? And how should we see this in the context of the mid-October letter sent by Secretaries Austin and Blinken?
I don't think that's the way you should take it. I think you should take it to be consistent with the letter that the Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin sent, where they made quite clear that we're concerned about the humanitarian situation. You heard me address yesterday, we're particularly concerned about the humanitarian situation in Jabalia, where food isn't getting in right now and water isn't getting in right now. And that does need to change. And that's what Ambassador Thomas Greenfield was making clear in those remarks.
Can we stay on the Lebanon
Yeah.
part of that just for a second? I mean, there are multiple reports coming out of both Beirut and out of Israel that the U.S. has proposed some kind of a ceasefire plan for Lebanon that would call for a full implementation of UNSCR 1701 with the withdrawals by both Hezbollah and Israel within 2 months. Is that at all your understanding of where?
So I don't want to get into the private diplomatic conversations that we're having, including about what any potential timetables might be. But we have been making clear in those conversations that we want to see, as part of a diplomatic resolution, the full implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701, and that means Hezbollah withdrawing north of the Litani River. It means Israel ultimately withdrawing south of the Blue Line, and it means peace and stability. And what we're working on to get to that point are ways to bolster the Lebanese armed forces to ensure that they can provide security and they can provide stability in southern Lebanon. Alex.
Thank you. Very quickly on Iran, and I'll move back to Ukraine again. In the case of Jamshid Shahmad, you tweeted about Iran murdering the U.S. person, California resident. Some of us have been covering this case. You told us for months that you will be judging the Islamic Republic by their action. Well, this is their action.
Yeah, and I think we've made quite clear what we think about this action, as we made quite clear what we think about previous actions that the Iranian government has taken. And you've seen us, since the outset of this administration, impose more than 700 sanctions on Iran and Iran entities for a number of actions, including their human rights violations against their own people. We condemn the execution of German-Iranian dual citizen Jamshid Sharmad, which reminds us once again of the brutality and repression that characterizes the Iranian regime. We offer our sincere condolences to his loved ones. We have been in touch with them to express those condolences directly. This is the latest abhorrent act by Iran following the transnational repression it committed when it abducted him. It also underscores the record pace of unjust executions in Iran continues unabated despite Iran's attempts to promote a gentler face to the international community. So we are in touch with the German government, we are in touch with the European Union and our other allies, and we will continue to stand with them in holding the Iranian regime accountable for its brutal human rights abuses.
You told us in the past that you believe that Iranian supreme leader is in charge of decision-making process. So by refusing to sanction him in the past, in the Mahsa case and other cases, do you think you're actually creating an atmosphere in which he's acting in...
Alex, I just went through the litany of sanctions that we have imposed on Iran, and remind you that we have worked with other entities around the world to impose sanctions on Iran. If you look at what happened in just the last month, you saw our European allies step up for the first time and impose sanctions on Iran Air, which will have real implications for that airline's ability to operate flights between Iran and European destinations. So I will make no apologies for our efforts to hold Iran accountable for its behavior.
Thank you. On Ukraine, you spoke about your mock meeting. I know I say you might not want to get ahead of the meeting,
but here's a question about it.
Two questions actually. If
here's a question to get ahead of the meeting.
If you indulge me, there are reports
The
that
White House has already put out a statement about his meeting with Jake.
He met with Jake earlier. He's meeting with the secretary. That meeting, the meeting with the secretary.
White House statement's already out.
Right. Well, I apologize for not putting out a statement about a meeting that hasn't happened yet here at the.
How much of the
Parliament.
issue of North Korea, supplying, the troops for Russia to fight in Ukraine will be the subject?
Certainly, that will be one of the topics that they cover.
The U.S. will not impose restrictions in future if that is the case. Can you confirm that this is actually?
I'm not going to comment on those reports. Let me, Alex. That was 4 or 5. I got to move on. Go ahead.
Thank you. A couple of weeks ago, Department of Justice indicted an Indian agent for a murder plot against a Sikh human rights lawyer in New York. You told us that U.S. wants to see meaningful accountability by the Modi government, but that agent still has not been arrested. So what are the next steps? Is U.S. seeking his extradition?
So that's a matter I would refer you to the Justice Department on when it comes to a question of extradition. That, of course, is a legal matter. We always defer to DOJ to speak to extradition. But I will tell you that we have been in dialogue with the government of India about this matter. Of course, they sent a delegation here 2 weeks ago to directly brief U.S. government officials on the status of their investigation, and we briefed them on the status of our investigation. And we made clear in that meeting, but we will continue to make clear that it is important there be real accountability.
Sir, after the killing of Sikh leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Canada by Indian agents, Canadian authorities expelled all Indian agents serving in the Indian High Commission. And there are some unconfirmed reports that same action took place here in Washington, D.C. Could you confirm or deny State Department expelled the Indian agents serving in High Commission here in D.C.? Or?
I'm not familiar with this report that we expelled Indian diplomats?
Yes,
no.
Indian agents who are serving here in
no, I'm not aware of any such expulsion, no. Ryan. Yeah, and then we'll go to Ryan. Sorry, Ryan.
I'll cover it. Just quickly, I know it was a few days ago, but India and China, I don't know if the State Department has commented on that. India and China said that they're working to resolve their border role potentially through joint patrols was reached during the BRICS summit. Does the U.S. have any comment on that? Has the U.S. had any indirect engagement on this?
So we're closely following the developments. We understand that both countries have taken initial steps to withdraw troops from friction points along the line of actual control. We welcome any reduction in tensions along the border.
And does the U.S. had the U.S. played any role in
No, we have talked to our Indian partners and been briefed on it, but we did not play any role in this resolution. Go ahead, Ryan.
Thank you. So you commented earlier on how the letter that you guys sent in mid-October to Israel mentions suggests that they not pass the UNRWA ban. Right above that, in that same letter, bullet point 3 of the 3 bullet points says that Israel should also end isolation of northern Gaza by reaffirming that there will be no Israeli government policy of forced evacuations of civilians from northern to southern Gaza, ensuring humanitarian organizations have continuous access to northern Gaza through northern crossings and from southern Gaza. Obviously, the 30 days isn't up, but 2 weeks ago, the situation in northern Gaza was bad. Like today, it's utterly dystopian. The opposite of making progress has happened there. Somebody mentioned the 109 civilians killed in this residential building as part of this forced evacuation. So it seems like neither of those two things have happened, and in fact, they've gone the opposite direction. Do you need the 30 days to make an assessment on at least that bullet?
So we have made clear that the situation in northern Gaza, which is what that bullet refers to, needs to change. And Secretary Blinken made clear directly to the Prime Minister last week that the situation in northern Gaza needs to change, that we need to see everyone in northern Gaza, every civilian in northern Gaza have access to food and water and other humanitarian assistance, and we're going to continue to make that clear.
You started with the RSF and the most recent war crimes. UAE is one of the strongest backers of the RSF. You guys are very tight with the UAE. Why can't the U.S. pressure the UAE to put a stop to this?
How long is this going to go? We have made clear to every country in the region, every country around the world, that no country should do anything to prolong this conflict, including providing arms to either of the warring parties.
It just seems like countries in that region just aren't interested. Like, maybe they listen, but they just don't follow the advice that works.
Look, every country makes its own decisions on a host of foreign policy issues. But I can tell you that the thing that the Secretary heard time and time again as we were in the region last week is that partner after partner welcomed our engagement because we are the only ones who could play this critical role of trying to end conflicts in Gaza, trying to end conflicts in Sudan. They're difficult. They're parties with intensely competing interests in their own politics and their own situations. But we heard over and over again that countries welcome the role that we play. Now, it doesn't mean every country follows exactly the course that we prescribe, but we continue to try and play the leadership role that we think the moment demands, try and bring countries together to find an end to these wars.
Yeah, and just real quickly on Pakistan, I know you commented yesterday on the letter from 62 members of Congress. The Pakistan media is reporting that Pakistan security services responded to that letter by putting out dossiers of the members of Congress who signed that letter and flagging a particular number of them that were Jewish and a particular number of them that were supporters of LGBT rights in an effort to undermine the strength of that letter. Is there any level of kind of embarrassing conduct from the ISI or from the Pakistan military that would cause the U.S. to kind of rethink this relationship?
Let me just say, obviously that's something that would be concerning to us, but I haven't seen that report yet. So before I offer a substantive comment on it, I want to take a look at the report myself and be able to weigh in on it. And we'll either get you a written answer, or I'm happy to come back and address it tomorrow from the podium.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. On Thursday's phone call between Secretary Blinken and Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan, can you please give me more details on what was discussed specifically about Turkey's fight against terror, given that call came immediately after Turkey was hit by a terror attack?
Yeah, so there were a number of things that the Secretary and the Foreign Minister covered on the call. First of all, the Secretary expressed the United States' condolences for that attack and expressed our solidarity with the Turkish people in the face of a terrorist attack. But then they also on the call addressed the work that the Secretary had been doing in the region to bring the war in Gaza to an end, to find a diplomatic resolution to the conflict in Lebanon, to work to prevent the situation between Israel and Iran from further escalating, made that call. The secretary made that call while we were traveling from the region to London. So in addition to offering his condolences for the terrorist attack, he was updating the foreign minister on all the work that we did on all of these fronts, on which we see Turkey as a critical partner. One more, and then we'll wrap for today.
Thank you, sir. Two quick questions for you. First, on UNRWA, you mentioned the U.S. playing the indispensable role of trying to end conflicts. Ambassador Thomas Greenfield brought up today that Israel and the UN need to talk to each other, not at each other. There's this 90-day window now before the implementation. Does the U.S., while it's pressuring Israel, go to the UN and say, listen, you're not faultless here either. UNRWA has been infiltrated by Hamas. It's time not for these cosmetic whitewash report changes, but something really, really big here and try to meet halfway. Is there an opening for that?
We have made quite clear that we have made quite clear that UNRWA needs to undertake reforms. We have made quite clear that they need to investigate any allegations brought to them of misconduct by their employees. And we have seen them conduct investigations, and we have seen them dismiss a number of employees. Now, when you look at look at further into this matter, you see that UNRWA has said, and if the government of Israel wants to dispute this, they should dispute it publicly. UNRWA has said that with respect to a number of the allegations that Israel has made against UNRWA employees, when UNRWA has asked for the information from the government of Israel that they would need to investigate those claims, the government of Israel has refused to provide it. So yes, UNRWA absolutely needs to take allegations seriously. They need to investigate them. If there is anyone on their payroll who is involved in the terrorist attacks of October 7th, who is connected to Hamas, who is involved in terrorism in any way, those people need to be dismissed, and UNRWA needs to look at reforms to ensure that such people are never hired again in the future. But the government of Israel also needs to provide information to UNRWA so it can carry out those investigations.
The Secretary General mourned the loss of what he called a colleague who carried out a massacre in southern Israel. It's one of those things that Israel kind of looks at and says, something's not computing here. But I want to get to the second question. I know we're short. Special Rapporteur for Palestinian Rights, Francesca Albanese, is in the U.S. She's going to give a presentation to the UN, do a little speaking tour. Ambassador Thomas Greenfield, Ambassador Taylor at the Human Rights Council, Ambassador Lipstadt have all deemed the Special Rapporteur, in words or some phrase, a purveyor of anti-Semitism. I know you can't comment on individual visa issues, but in a broader perspective, we've seen countries deny entry to those who have a history of anti-Semitic comments. Is that taken into account at all in a broader perspective by the State Department when it issues visas?
So I will just say that we have an obligation as the host country for the United Nations. We take that obligation very seriously, and one of those obligations is to grant visas to any number of individuals with views with which we do not agree. The Russian foreign minister travels to New York to participate in United Nations meetings. That is our obligation as the host of the United Nations, and it's one that we take seriously. And with that, we're out for today. Yeah, you have one more?
I wanted to go to my two separate individual people issues. The first on Iran. Do you have more to say about the execution yesterday of the U.S. resident?
I did just a moment ago in response to. You
did?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, I'm sorry, I completely missed that.
Clearly.
Okay, and then in Cambodia.
I was trying to think of I'll leave it at that.
So I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. I guess it just tuned out for a second. On Cambodia, the journalist.
I tuned out to some of your questions too, Matt. So
clearly,
offense not taken.
You can tell by the answers. The Cambodian journalist Nektar was released on bail last week, but there are calls. The charges against him remain in place, and I'm just wondering if you guys have anything to say about whether or not you think those charges are valid or should be dropped.
Let me just say that I think this is the first time we've had a chance to address this at the podium since he was released. So I'll say that, first of all, we welcome that Nektar was released and is able to reunite with his family, and we will continue to monitor his case closely. We raised his case at multiple levels in Cambodia and in Washington. We were one of many voices among governments, journalists, civil society representatives who expressed concern for his arrest and advocated for his release. And we will continue to monitor his case closely and call on Cambodian authorities to support a positive resolution for that case. ensuring that all of his rights are respected. Now, I don't know what the follow-up is going to be, so I'm just going to stop there and say, sometimes when it comes to sensitive diplomatic matters like this, we have found that it is better to say less and work harder privately, and that's this is one of those cases. So, and with that, I'm going to wrap. With that, I'm going to wrap for today. Thanks.